My name is Naomi Blake, and the night Trent Maddox said, "You'll never make it," I started writing the list of ways I would. They threw the firm's holiday after party on a rooftop in Center City, where the heaters huffed like tired dragons, and the skyline glittered as if it had dressed for someone else. My name tag still clung to my dress like an apology. Naomi, paralegal. Partners and their spouses clustered in shine-polished circles, telling the same 3 victory stories with different cufflinks. I carried briefs all week and champagne tonight, a human tray with student debt. Trent appeared, taller because the room let him be. He was 31, the golden boy associate with 3 closings in a quarter, and a father who could sponsor a law school wing by writing his initials. He knew how to place a hand at your elbow like a compliment. He also knew how to aim and whisper. "Come on," he said, tugging me toward a knot of men whose laughs sounded least. "You should meet Atlas Bank." He introduced me as our Philly hustle, a phrase that made me both visible and small. Someone asked where I went to law school. I said I hadn't yet. Trent's smile twitched, the way a dog checks a fence before barking. "She's got potential," he offered. "A real mascot for the firm. She makes our decks look pretty." The group laughed with the politeness reserved for appetizers and interns. I felt my neck flush the shade of a stop sign that never saved anybody. "Not merit," one of the men added, teasing, drunk enough to confess his contempt. Mascot, and the word hung there, humming, like a neon open sign that forgot its purpose. I excused myself into cold air with teeth. The city wind cut my lashes into focus. I leaned on the parapet and opened my phone to the recorder, because you can't argue with a future you haven't saved. 3 goals, I said to the red dot. Harvard Law. Own something big enough to fire people who think I'm decoration. And a home where no one can evict my dignity. My breath made small ghosts. I named each one. Behind me, the sliding door sighed, and Trent stepped out, coat still unbuttoned like confidence never feels weather. "Hey," he said softly, as if he hadn't rearranged me in public. "Don't be sensitive. You're brilliant at what you do. What I do isn't carry other people's shine," I said. He laughed, not unkindly, which almost made it worse. "Naomi, be realistic. The law is brutal. Not everyone's built for it. You'll never make it the way you imagine, but you can make it with me." He reached for my hand like a bridge. I let the wind take my answer. In the elevator down, his reflection tried to apologize to mine. On the sidewalk, December chewed my anger into clarity. I texted Shay, still breathing. "Need to go somewhere cheap with fries." She replied, "Always. Also, you're a weapon." I wanted to believe her the way I wanted to leave gravity. Back in my walk-up, the radiator sang an off-key lullaby. I hung my dress on the closet knob, swapped heels for socks with planets on them, and opened my laptop. The screen offered me 3 tabs: LSAC account, Harvard Law admissions portal, budget spreadsheet titled No Parties Year. I clicked LSAC first, just to watch the page load like a dare. My inbox pinged. One new message with a subject line I wasn't supposed to see. Harvard admissions, confidential. It had arrived 10 minutes ago, while I was still on the roof pretending to be non-flammable. My pulse made the cursor shake. For a second, the room receded and the radiator stopped trying. Trent's sentence tried to climb the wall and hang itself like art. I told it to wait its turn. I didn't open the email. Not yet. I made myself say each goal out loud into the room that knew me at my most unglamorous. Harvard, ownership, home. I poured water, drank half, and sat down like a person about to invite a future inside. I clicked. I opened my inbox and saw a subject line I wasn't supposed to see. Harvard admissions, confidential. Dreams don't whisper. They arrive in crimson. The email wasn't a fever. Harvard Law, actual letterhead, actual words. "We are pleased to offer you admission, with the option to defer up to 1 year. I reread the line until it lost nouns. Then I screamed into a pillow because joy doesn't need the neighbor's opinions. When I surfaced, the radiator had decided to be a choir. I FaceTimed Shay, who answered with a banana in one hand and a charting tablet in the other. "Tell me it's the good scream," she said. "It's the crimson scream," I replied. She whooped so loud a nurse shushed her. "We're buying you a hoodie we can't afford," she said. "Also, I'm your emergency contact for every meltdown between now and orientation." I printed the letter on my janky inkjet because paper still outranks pixels in my house. I taped it above my desk next to my no parties year calendar and my grandmother's magnet. Do it afraid. The deferral option sat there, winking. I could wait 1 year, save money, collect recommendations, harden my edges. Trent texted at 1:11 a.m. as if numbers could bless him. Heard you got some news. Congrats. Then after my silence, come over. I didn't. I slept like someone who had finally evicted a tenant from her ribcage. Morning brought a knock and a courier with a red envelope heavy enough to change posture. Inside, the official packet, embossed, perfumed with future. My phone buzzed again. Trent, let's celebrate at my dad's club. He pulled strings for you. A second text followed. A photo of my resume on Graham Maddox's desk with the caption, "Don't overreach." Shay texted, "Breathe." Then block. But first, screenshot. I did all three in order. At lunch, I sat in Rittenhouse Square with a turkey sandwich that was trying its best. I wrote a quit email draft to my firm that didn't include the sentence, "I'm more than your mascot." I opened the LSAC portal and wrote an appeal for a need-based scholarship, attaching my mother's union pay stubs and my rent receipts that smelled like anxiety. I emailed Professor Iris Mendel, Temple undergraduate torts, a woman who taught me that rights are only as real as the budgets that enforce them. She replied within 15 minutes with, "Of course. Also come to office hours. Bring your spine." That afternoon, I found the clinic downtown, the one that takes landlord-tenant cases and fragile dignity. I signed up for evening intake shifts on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The director, Caleb Ortiz, looked like he could lift a building and maybe had. "We teach law by using it," he said. "You sure you want this?" "Yes," I said, recognizing that my voice had stopped auditioning. Trent called as I was leaving. I let him go to voicemail. His message sounded like a TED Talk that forgot content. "Naomi, quotas are real, babe. My dad knows admissions. He can keep you from making a mistake. Don't overreach. It hurts when you fall. Overreach is how stars happen," I told the air. I added an extra intake shift. At night, I made a budget that looked like a dare. Cut streaming, cut brunch, keep running shoes, keep coffee grounds. I added a line item. Side gig tutoring. LSAT logic games for undergrads willing to pay in cash and gratitude. I DM'd 3, booked 2, and put their names in a spreadsheet called Harvard Fuel. Shay sent me $40 on Venmo labeled Hoodie Fund and a text. He didn't pull strings. "You climbed them." I believed her just enough to sleep. 2 days later, another text from Trent landed like a glove. A photo of my resume on his father's desk, again, this time under a pen shaped like a dagger. Caption, "Don't overreach." The threat wore manners. I saved the image. I added it to a folder named Receipts. I folded the red packet closed and slid it under my pillow. Not because I'm 12, but because some miracles need a night guard. Trent texted a photo, my resume on his father's desk with the caption, "Don't overreach." Some years don't sparkle. They sharpen. I declared a year of monkhood and then gave it teeth. Mornings. 3 miles along the Schuylkill with LSAT logic game sets folded into my pocket like threats. Afternoons. Paralegal hours that turned other people's drafts into arguments. Evenings. Clinic intake, where the waiting room smelled like courage and old winters. Nights. Tutoring freshmen who paid in crumpled 20s and gratitude. Both accepted. On Thursdays, I took the 38 bus to Professor Iris Mendel's office hours, where the books leaned like old men listening. She made tea like a cross-exam. "Why Harvard?" she asked. "Because it scares men like Trent," I said before I could curate. "Wrong answer," she said, smiling. "Try again." "Because I want to argue where the rules get written," I said. "And because I want my mother to see a courtroom where she isn't afraid." "Better," she said. "I'll write your letter. It will be painful to the unprepared." I loved her instantly. At the clinic, I learned that eviction notices often carry the same cologne as board minutes. Caleb Ortiz taught me intake triage like battlefield medicine. "You don't have to solve everything," he said. "You have to decide what gets oxygen first." On a gray Tuesday, we were short-staffed and long on people. A woman with 2 kids, a man with a cane, a teenager holding a plastic bag with all her mail. I learned to copy, to scan, to staple, to listen. I learned that the phrase, "we'll call you," feels like ricochet if you don't say it right. At home, I drafted an op-ed about predatory arbitration, how clauses hide in font size 11 and eat wages. I pitched it to the Inquirer the way you throw a bottle into a tide and then check again, because tides can be kind. 3 days later, they wrote back, "Interested. Cut by 150 words. Add local case." I did, and my name printed itself into a city I didn't want to leave. Trent's sabotage arrived on letterhead. A senior partner called me in and patted a chair the way people pat dogs. "We reached out to references," he said, eyes kind, mouth not. "One suggested you might be volatile under pressure." "Which reference?" I asked. He smiled the way elevators do before closing. "We can't share that." Shay texted. "He's behind it. I can smell his cologne through the phone." I believed her. I wrote another op-ed anyway. The firm retracted their concerns when the clinic featured my work on their site with an unfortunate number of exclamation points. I felt a petty joy and kept walking. Winter piled up at the curb. Judge Elena Marquez came to the clinic one night, a legend in sensible boots. She watched me interview a tenant with a mold problem and a landlord with a temper. After, she said, "You fight pretty. Can you fight fair?" "I can fight documented," I said. "Good," she said. "I like receipts." She gave me her chamber's number. "If anyone threatens your clinic, you call me. If you threaten your own rest, you call Shay." The blocked call came on a Wednesday, when the wind sounded like bad news. A gentleman's voice. All velvet and closets. "Withdraw Harvard, and your clinic loses funding." Click. No name. But I recognized the scent. Money that thinks it's morality. I brought the voicemail to Caleb, who played it 3 times, and then copied it to a thumb drive like a prayer. "We don't blink," he said. "We blink in statements." I added a new line to my no parties year calendar. Learn to cut strings without bleeding. I bought a cheap pair of nicer shoes and taped them above my desk. The promise that one day, courtrooms would hear me as a noun, not an echo. A blocked number. Withdraw Harvard and your clinic loses funding. Every donation has a leash if you don't check the collar. The clinic's website listed donors under a polite heading that smelled like compromise. There, 3 lines down, the Maddox Family Foundation. I tasted copper. I asked Caleb for access to old emails. He gave me a password and a warning. Read like a lawyer, not a crusader. Thread by thread, the leash revealed itself. Messages with subject lines like "grateful to support" included sentences like, "We reconfident the clinic will focus on landlord education rather than adversarial posture." Another, "Excited to continue funding if priorities align." No explicit quid pro quo, just a grammar lesson in pressure. I printed the worst offenders and put them in a folder named Sunlight. I brought them to Judge Marquez, who read quietly, face smooth, pen precise. "You can't accuse them of explicit extortion," she said. "But you can accuse them of philanthropy with conditions that harm your mission. Transparency is disinfectant. Draft a statement with your director. Cite the emails without adjectives." Caleb and I wrote at his desk until the radiator stopped lying about being warm. We drafted a public transparency statement. We thank donors. We disclose influence. We refuse direction that undermines tenants' rights. We invite replacement funding to remove any perception of pressure. We signed it. We sent it to the board, the city paper, our mailing list. We braced. The next morning, the foundation emailed a paragraph that wore concern like perfume. "We regret any misunderstanding and will be pausing funding while the clinic reassesses its mission." Translation: tantrum. 2 hours later, 3 small donations arrived from nurses, a teacher, a church. Shay texted me a screenshot of her receipt. $100. Scissors money. Trent responded with rage disguised as culture. "You're sabotaging good people," he said outside the courthouse where we had both come to file other people's paper. "My father has supported this city for decades." "Your father buys applause," I said. "I'm buying receipts." He laughed, out of jokes. "Withdraw Harvard," he said, the sentence small enough to step on. "No," I said, the word big enough to sit. I slid his apartment key from my ring and pressed it into his palm there on the courthouse steps where justice pretends to live. "You can keep your doorman," I said. "I'm keeping my door." He tried one last turn. "You'll miss the parties," he said. "I threw a year where we don't go," I said. "I'm busy." That afternoon, a padded envelope arrived. Harvard orientation packet. Inside, a schedule, a map, and a note in actual ink. Find Professor Vivian Cho. VM initials for Vivian, the corporate M&A surgeon whose articles I had highlighted into confetti. I traced the letters like runes, and then laughed at myself, because I was not the chosen one. I was a woman who could read. I called Shay from the bus. "He wanted me to withdraw," I said. "And?" I returned his key in front of the courthouse. Shay whooped into my ear. Put that in your bar application under leadership. At the clinic, we learned that donors blink first when you publish their squint. 2 more small checks arrived with notes that smelled like casseroles and grit. Judge Marquez sent a clerk downstairs with a post-it. Good scissors work. Rest tonight. You look like a person who forgets to eat. I microwaved leftover rice, stared at the orientation packet, and practiced saying Professor Cho without sounding like a pilgrim. In the mirror, my mouth didn't flinch. When sleep came, it brought a dream where the leashes fell from everything we touched. Harvard orientation packet arrived, with a handwritten note. Find Professor Vivian Cho. Law school didn't scare me. Silence during cold call did. Boston felt like a city built by commas, stones, turns, clauses stacked in old grammar. I moved into a studio that used to be a closet and made it earn rent. Bed, desk, kettle, 2 mugs. A plant I named Precedent because it died and came back. Orientation week was a fire hose that had read Dale Carnegie. Smiles, name tags, free pens that whispered branding. Professor Vivian Cho took the stage like a scalpel cultivated legs. We're here to teach you how to move capital without bleeding people dry, she said. Fail me by performing cynicism. Pass me by being specific. Her syllabus read like a treasure map to rooms where decisions sit before they get voiced. My section included Alyssa Crane, whose eyebrows grated you, and Derek Vaughn, who had the jawline of a television lawyer and the notes of a tourist. There was also Lucas Romero, ex-investment banker, now JD candidate, whose tie refused to learn humility, but whose questions did the work. He sat 2 rows over and said, counterparty risk, as if it were an apology. I learned to outline with humility and to brief with verbs. Cold calls felt like God tapping my name with an eraser. The first time Cho asked me about poison pills, my mouth remembered English just in time to resent my body. They deter hostile takeovers by diluting the acquirer, I said. But used badly, they deter accountability. Used well? She asked. They buy time to fix the business, I said, surprising myself with a sentence that sounded like I'd spoken to a factory. Acceptable, she said, which felt like a hug in her dialect. I took a part-time barista job 2 mornings a week, where I learned that foam is a metaphor for bad law. Pretty, brief, empties fast. Evenings, I took clinic intake through the school's partnership, slide decks by day and bedbug photos by night. I hosted LSAT tutoring on Saturdays for 3 undergrads who called me Ms. Blake and made me feel like a lighthouse someone else could afford. Vivian Cho's seminars were where the blood got interesting. She walked us through boardroom chess, like a coach teaching endgames to toddlers who insisted pawns had feelings. She assigned case studies that smelled like money and affidavits. In week 6, she called me to her office. The walls were an argument for restraint. She gestured to a chair. I obeyed. You're a paralegal who learned to argue before she learned to invoice, she said. You grew teeth at a clinic. You write like you could stab with a comma. Good. Stop apologizing for not being born in a boardroom. I began. You apologize with posture, she said. Fix it. Then she slid a sealed manila folder across the desk. Read this before they shred it, the sticky note said in her clean hand. You are going to learn what due diligence means when the data room thinks no one else watching. What is it? I asked. Halcyon Outfitters, she said. Legacy retail, Heartland stores, e-com a decade late. They hired consultants to bleed them in slow motion. Which consultants? She looked at me over glasses that could retire men. The kind who name their fees after Greek tragedies. Read. I carried the folder to my studio like contraband. The plant watched me like a witness. I broke the seal and turned on the kettle, because boiling water is a ritual worth keeping when stories get sharp. Vivian slid a sealed case file across the desk. Read this before they shred it. Due diligence is just confession in spreadsheets. The Halcyon folder smelled like toner and regret. Inside, lease schedules, consultant invoices, a memo labeled Project Glacier that somebody thought was subtle. I spread the pages on my bed because the desk felt too small for this kind of hurt. Halcyon Outfitters, stores that sold tents to families and jackets to people who liked porch weather, had been quietly bled by sale leasebacks with escalators that made math blush. The consultant, Maddox LLP, my stomach noted without asking permission, layered strategic transformation fees, like frosting thick enough to sit a bottle cap on. I built a grid. Lease pain, fee bleed, e-com fixes, headcount harm. Lease Payne showed 10 stores owing rent as if the landlord owned their lungs. Fee bleed spelled MADDOX in totals that rounded themselves into contempt. Ecom fixes, unattempted or miswired. Headcount harm, predictable. Cut hours, cut benefits, blame the weather. I cross-referenced with public data and union notes that mentioned a warehouse lead named Damian Brooks, who'd tried to warn corporate that consultant oxygen choked humans. I placed a sticky with his name and wrote, "Find him." Vivian had said, "Before they shred it," and my email made her prophecy immediate. Cease and desist. Confidential material. Sender. Graham Maddox, LLP. The letter puffed itself like a toad. It accused me of possessing proprietary documents, threatened academic consequences, and CC'd someone at the dean's office who signed emails without vowels. I took the letter to school counsel, who yawned in legal. Academic exception, she said. Clinical observation, research, pedagogy, you're fine. Don't distribute beyond course. Do keep receipts. I exhaled. I texted Lucas. Got a live one? Want pain? He replied with a gif of a man in a suit handing someone a bucket. We met in a library, Carol, and built a shadow model on a laptop that had seen better wars. If you unwind the worst leases, kill the consultant bleed, and rewire ecom with someone who knows what a cart is, the company could breathe. The numbers didn't sing. They stopped drowning. At midnight, I emailed Vivian a summary that read like triage. She replied at 12:03. Passable. Who bleeds them? I wrote. Maddox LLP, and almost added Trent as a footnote. But I was not writing a romance. I was writing a diagnosis. In the corner of my room, Precedent dropped a leaf and then pretended it had never loved water. I poured anyway. I highlighted until my markers begged union rules. I read worker testimonials slipped into the data room like contraband. One from Damien. We can hit targets if the targets are human. Stop pretending rent increases don't have wrists attached. I put the folder away like an altar. I stared at the ceiling and heard Trent's rooftop voice. Mascot. Overreach. You'll never make it. I answered him with a budget and a plan. I answered with law that didn't break people to prove it worked. I slept because you can't kill a hydra on no glucose. Morning delivered a second letter from Maddox that scolded my posture. I ignored it. I wrote a list titled, If I Owned This, Renegotiate Leases with Radius Clauses, Convert Dead Stores into Micro Studios, Bring Ecom in-house with people who care, Profit Share at the Warehouse, Bury Consulting in a Cemetery it can't invoice. I didn't know then that lists can be prophecy if you feed them enough nouns. Email ping, cease and desist, confidential material. Sender, Graham Maddox, LLP. They taught me to brief cases. I briefed a war. School council sent an official note invoking academic protections. A shield written in the language of people who color code their calendars. Maddox LLP huffed and puffed in reply. I ignored the weather and kept building. Lucas and I turned the shadow model into a plan a sober bank could hear. Fix leases with escalators that assumed oxygen is optional. Kill the consulting bleed by declaring the emperor fee naked. Revive ecom with carts that don't lose items when you breathe. Rebrand lightly. Keep nostalgia. Ditch dust. We argued about the order of operations like people discussing triage in a lifeboat. Which limb first? Vivian audited our spreadsheets with a pencil that didn't make mistakes. You left money on the table, she said, circling a cell. Find it and make it choose you. Then she texted me an address. Warehouse B, South Boston, 4 p.m. No emoji. I went. Damian Brooks met me by a dock door that had seen better tempers. He was mid-40s with forearms that wrote essays. You're the student who keeps asking about the cooling units, he said without greeting. Because they keep breaking, I said. Because someone keeps not replacing them, he corrected. He gave me a tour that didn't flatter anyone. Pallets sweating under dead fans. Men in hoodies doing math with bodies. A whiteboard that tried to pretend time is just numbers. He told me about hours shaved to make a quarter grin. About schedules written by consultants who never set a foot on a dock. They keep calling it optimization, he said, scratching his jaw. I call it making people run with rocks in their shoes. I took notes until my hand reminded me it had bones. When I asked him why he hadn't left, he looked at the crew and shrugged. Because they're mine, he said, and because I think this thing still has a pulse if someone stops leeching it. Back in my studio, Shay Venmo'd me $500 labeled first brick of mansion. I laughed until my ribs remembered rent. When you buy your house with more bathrooms than arguments, she texted, remember my brick. Put my name on a plant. Done, I said. I renamed President Shay, who promptly perked up because names matter. Vivian called me into her office 2 days later and slid a small letter across her desk. Cho and Hart, summer associate offer. I stared at the words like they might sprout legs. You'll see Graham across the table, she said. If that scares you, say no. I don't get scared, I lied. She tilted her head. Everyone gets scared. The brave write scripts for their fear. She tapped the Halcyon folder. You're going to need one. I spent the next week doing fire drills. Financial independence retire early when you re-24 and allergic to avocado toast math. I maxed my savings, shaved my budget with a straight razor, and built a timeline. Summer at Cho and Hart. Halcyon negotiations. Graduate. Bar. Change something that pays people back. The list did not ask Trent for permission. Shay sent me a photo of her scrub pocket with a granola bar and a note. Eat, or I'll call your professor. I ate. I slept 6 hours, then 7, like a person building a future that needed durable knees. On Friday, Vivian caught me in the hallway. Summer associate? She asked. My shop. Yes, I said. You'll see Graham across the table, she added, as if handing me the weather. Don't flirt with thunder. Study it. Vivian. Summer associate? My shop. But you'll see Graham across the table. Conference rooms are polite cages. Cho and Hart's lobby had the light of a museum that remembers being a bank. The receptionist said my name like a verdict I'd already passed. The conference rooms wore marble and mercy poorly. Vivian walked me in and let me sit at the junior chair, which is how you learn whether power is allergic to you. Graham Maddox entered with 2 associates on leash, one of whom was Trent, all jaw and grievance. He saw me and smoothed his tie like it could save him from gravity. Ms. Blake, he said, voice measured to impress a camera that wasn't there. Mr. Maddox, I replied, hands folded, pen uncapped. I saw Trent's mouth shape my name and decide to mispronounce it later. We began with pleasantries that pretended to be law. Halcyon's board wanted concessions from creditors who wanted fees who wanted blood. Cho and Hart wanted to stop the hemorrhage long enough to negotiate with organs still inside. Maddox LLP wanted to keep billing for transfusions. When talk turned to covenants, I quoted a clause no one expected the summer kid to know. Graham glanced at me like a man checking a mirror that had opinions. You've read the indenture? He asked. I've read the part about bad faith fees triggering material adverse effects, I said. And the clause that permits a standstill when consultant conflicts exceed predefined thresholds. That clause is aspirational, Trent said, smile small and sharp. It's operational if you document, I said, which we have. I slid a binder across the table. Inside, invoices stacked like sins and emails where Maddox consultants suggested delaying maintenance to preserve optics. Vivian didn't look at me. She looked at Graham the way surgeons look at tumors and pick instruments. We broke for coffee. In the hallway, Trent cornered me near the elevators where men propose and lose jobs. Walk away, he said softly, or I walk you out of law. I've already taken the stairs, I said. The doors closed on his face, which was a luxury and a screensaver. Back in the room, I argued for a creditor standstill using a rarely invoked MAC clause tied to the consultant's bad faith billings. Graham called it creative, the way men label women disobedient when they mean correct. Vivian called it appropriate, which felt better. The creditors blinked first because math compelled them. We drafted the standstill in language that smelled like steel. Halcyon exhaled. Workers didn't know yet, but the warehouse would feel it within a week when overtime stopped being a magic trick, and the fans turned back on. At 5, when signatures finished pretending ink is permanent, Graham packed his aura. He shook Vivian's hand like they were 2 storms negotiating. He didn't offer me his. Trent did, because pettiness also graduates. I took it. His grip tried to write a message. Mine wrote it back. In the elevator again, he whispered, "You can't outrun my father." "I'm not running," I said. "I'm buying comfortable shoes." That night, I sat on my futon and calculated how many hours of tutoring it would take to pay for 1 more semester of foam and photocopies. I sent Damien a short email. Standstill obtained. Fans coming back. Not a promise. Paper. He answered with one line, "Paper beats fear. Thanks." Vivian texted at 11:12 p.m. "Ego will escalate. Wrap your head in procedure." I added it to the list of commandments I keep on index cards. Eat, sleep, document, don't perform, don't panic. Do call Shay. I called Shay. She cried and laughed while meal prepping for a 12-hour shift. "You're a weapon," she said. "Also, drink water." Trent corners her at elevators. "Walk away, or I walk you out of law." The doors close, on his face. "A TRO is a tourniquet. You still need surgery." The temporary restraining order we secured on consultant withdrawals didn't fix Halcyon. It simply stopped the bleeding long enough to sterilize the room. Vivian reminded me 100 times in 100 ways. Tourniquets earn surgeons. Don't mistake one for the other. Halcyon workers who had been carrying the company across a desert with no shoes found my email somehow. They sent videos from warehouses and break rooms, fans humming again, schedules printed with actual lunch. One man lifting his shirt to show a bruise healing. "Tell whoever did that paper," he said into a shaky camera. We felt it. I watched them with my sandwich in my lap and cried into my bread like a baptism. Then I called my mother. "Ma," I said, "I'm buying you a car." "Don't you dare," Darlene Blake said, laughter a shield for years of broken things. "You need to buy books and not fall through the floor." "I can do both," I said. "A used Camry, nothing flashy. 4 good tires. No prayers required to start." She argued like a woman who has earned her stubborn. I won like a daughter who finally had receipts. We signed paperwork the next Saturday at a lot that sold modest dreams. She put her hand on the hood and whispered, "We go where we want now." I took a picture and saved it under Y. Back in Boston, Judge Marquez called. "I read your TRO," she said, voice like a gavel that prefers velvet. "Clean. Watch your adjectives in court. Save them for the op-eds. Win with paper, not performance." "Yes, Judge," I said, because the last thing I needed was to be interesting in front of her. The standstill bought Halcyon 60 days. Cho and Hart used everyone like a surgeon uses a scalpel and a stopwatch. We built the audit plan, mapped lease unwinds, and drafted severance protections that didn't taste like PR. Lucas found a way to renegotiate a dumbest lease award into a merely stupid one. Damien sent weekly updates from the floor that smelled like diesel and relief. At night, Trent texted threats that read like Hallmark cards for sociopaths. "You don't belong here. My father can close your future like a door." I put them in the receipts folder with the labeled subject lines, weather and noise. Vivian called me into her office the day before my last summer Friday. She shut the door and handed me tea. "When you graduate," she said, "don't just work a deal. Buy it." I laughed because it was a sentence built from richer alphabets. "With what money?" I asked. "With other people's," she said. "With a story that convinces them to want your outcome. With a plan you can defend to a mean committee. With a partner like Lucas who knows how to wire a nightmare. With a warehouse lead who will stand in front of a camera and tell the truth." My body answered before my mouth. "Yes," it said. She smiled, the kind that doesn't need glitter. "Good. Go finish 1L. Learn evidence. Learn to eat what you kill. Then we'll talk about owning things." On the train home, I wrote a new list. Syndicate, Halcyon, 50 centimeters, find angels, vendor financing, union note. I didn't know how to build it yet. I knew I could learn. I knew I could call Shay at 3 a.m. and she'd say drink water and you be terrifying in a good way. At my stop, I looked up and saw a billboard for a law firm that promised, "We win or you done to pay." I laughed so hard the woman next to me scooted away. "Winning is not a coupon. It's a calendar." Vivian whispered, "When you graduate, don't just work a deal. Buy it." Ownership is a verb with wiring instructions. 2L felt like running a relay where I kept every baton. By day, evidence, core, secured transactions. By night, the Halcyon file living rent-free in my Google Drive, expanding like a lung. On Sundays, I clerked in Judge Marquez's chambers, drafting memos, watching hearings, learning how judges hear silence. She made me rewrite sentences until they could bench press doubt. In October, Vivian invited me to a coffee that tasted like metal and possibility. At the table sat 2 strangers who looked like decisions. "Naomi," she said, "this is Celeste Ward, angel investor, and Noah Rudd, turnaround operator who's rebuilt more factories than most men have toured." Celeste shook my hand like she'd already read my credit report. Noah grinned like a man who knows forklifts by first name. Vivian says you can both read numbers and look people in the eye, Celeste said. That combination is rare. What would you do if Halcyon were yours? I opened the folder I'd been feeding for a year, the one titled Daylight. We carve out retail plus e-com and own the ops, I said. We unwind 5 dumb leases and renegotiate 10 bad ones. We stop paying transformation fees to consultants who've never lifted a pallet. We turn 3 dead stores into micro studios. We profit share with the warehouse and restore pensions over time. We wire the website like we mean it. Noah nodded. Who runs it? You, I said. Well, I chair it. With Damian Brooks on an advisory council. If workers don't recognize the plan, it's decoration. Celeste's eyebrow performed due diligence. Price? $57 million, I said. Funded by a senior facility from Atlas Bank at closing, vendor financing from the sellers, and a union-backed note collateralized by savings from lease unwind. Modest rollover for legacy shareholders who want reputation more than cash. Celeste tested the math. Noah tested me. What happens when winter kills foot traffic? He asked. We sell heat, I said. Video content, guided fit, field classes. We stop calling it retail and start calling it the studio that ships. Vivian watched like a guard dog. You pet only if you enjoy your fingers. She'll do the work, she said, which in her mouth is a blood oath. For the next 6 months, we ran a shadow campaign. Lucas, now interning at Praxian Capital, helped architect a model that didn't lie. I cold-called the widow of Halcyon's late founder, Evelyn Shaw, and asked for 15 minutes that turned into 2 hours. She told me stories about a storefront where people came for boots and stayed for advice. He'd hate what it's become, she said softly. He believed in warranties that included people. We mapped vendor financing. Former owners carry a slice of the price in exchange for dignity and upside. We drafted a union note path with Gabe Alston, a Teamsters liaison introduced by Damian. If the plan keeps folks breathing and fed, Gabe said, I'll take it to the stewards. I pitched Atlas Bank with Vivian on mute beside me, a silent angel with a scalpel. The banker, Rhea Sinclair, wore skepticism like jewelry. Term sheet contingent on clean diligence, environmental exposure ring-fenced, labor peace and no consulting ghosts, she said. I nodded. And, she added, the chair must pass my sniff test. I nodded again, because I'd brought deodorant made of spreadsheets. At night, I wrote a prospectus that read like a love letter to solvency. Daylight Holdings, Delaware LLC, mission, buy Halcyon's working pieces, return capacity to the people who use it. Celeste offered a seed commitment with conditions. Independent audit. Board majority independent. Community board seat. Judge Marquez pulled me aside after a hearing where a slick lawyer tried to sell adjectives as evidence. If you build this, she said, build it with doors. One for workers, one for bondholders, one for truth. I went home and taped that over the sink. In April, Vivian slid a document across her desk. Letter of intent, non-binding. Parties, Daylight Holdings and Halcyon Outfitters. Purchase price, $57,000, subject to diligence, financing, and negotiation of definitive agreements. I exhaled a year. 2 days later, Graham Maddox filed a competing LOI. Bigger headline number, smaller conscience. Trent named Deal Captain. His press quote called Halcyon a legacy brand ready for a premium finish. Mine called it a living company with a future. Words are offers, too. Graham filed a competing LOI, with Trent as Deal Captain. Money talks, governance votes. Halcyon's board convened in a hotel ballroom that used to host weddings and now hosted triage. On one side, Maddox LLP with glossy decks, a buffet of euphemisms, and Trent's smile like a patent claim. On ours, Cho and Hart with spines, Celeste with a term sheet appetite, Noah with a rollout calendar, Lucas with a model that didn't cheat, and me with a pitch that put people in the P&L. I opened with the sentence I would practiced into the steam above my kettle. We don't buy your obituary. We buy your options. Slide 1. Profit share proposal for warehouse teams. 5% of operating profit above a baseline. Slide 2. Storefront to studio conversion plan. 3 low-performing locations become content hubs that sell skill, not just stuff. Slide 3. Lease unwind victories in flight. Letters from landlords willing to trade escalators for occupancy. Graham countered with a smoother story. Premium consolidation, he purred. Executive incentives aligned with shareholder value. Strategic consulting partner retained. Translation: the fee machine rides again. An older director asked me, "How do you keep us off the front page as a casualty?" I pointed to Noah and Damien. "By making the people who know the floor write the plan," I said. Noah spoke of retrofit timelines. Damien, patched in by video from a warehouse break room, said in simple English what our slide deck took 20 pages to say. The room listened to him like oxygen. Then Kara Nguyen, a reporter with a byline that makes men hide, requested comment on a developing governance story. She'd heard about the duel. I neither confirmed nor denied. I invited her to the public board session scheduled for questions. Graham smiled into a lens that wasn't yet on. "We welcome transparency," he lied. Atlas Bank sent a soft commitment, contingent on clean diligence, environmental clarity, and labor peace. Ria's email read, "We like the rehab story. Don't embarrass us." I printed it and underlined us. The board split into camps: legacy romantic, math monk, PR hawk, coward. Evelyn Shaw, attending as honorary conscience, watched quietly, eyes sharp. We left after 4 hours with instructions to submit best and final within 10 days. The next morning, Kara S. inbox received an anonymous tip. Naomi S. syndicate isn't T-real. It included a grainy photo of me carrying a duffel and 4 lines of slur seasoned with envy. Kara called me. "Comment?" she asked. "On the duffel?" I said. It contained Tupperware and fear. "I mean on the allegation," she said, amused. I inhaled. "We have term sheets, not slogans. We have a bank that will wire if the numbers behave and the environment doesn't bite us. We have workers who will be paid to care. We have a widow who remembers when warranty meant something. On the Maddox plan?" she asked. "I don't critique competitors," I said. "I critique math," she laughed. "Okay, lawyer. Off the record. Why you?" "Because I know the color of the warehouse fans," I said. "And the smell of a room after consultants leave." The tip wasn't the only shiv. A whisper campaign painted me as too young, too angry, too clinic, too woman. Vivian forwarded me screenshots with a single instruction: do not react. Produce. So we produced. Lease unwind agreements signed. Vendor calls recorded. Environmental diligence engaged with a firm that doesn't flinch. Gabe lined up a labor peace letter with conditions. Safety bonuses tied to real metrics. Grievance timelines that don't insult the calendar. At night, Trent texted, "This is cute. You playing CEO." I archived it with the rest of the weather. At the end of the week, I walked alone along the Charles and reminded myself that water doesn't ask permission to move. I wrote tomorrow's script on a note card. We have cash, calendar, crew. We have receipts. Then I went home and slept like a woman who can't afford performance. Anonymous tip to Kara. Naomi's syndicate isn't real. The data room respects no one. Due diligence is a haunted house for optimists. We opened Halcyon's data room, and the ghosts introduced themselves. Environmental red flag. A decade-old solvent spill at a Midwestern warehouse. Capped, monitored, but lurking. Contractual hangnail. A supplier favored by a board member's cousin. Inventory gremlins. Counts off by just enough to insult. We triaged. I called Ria at Atlas. "We've got a spill," I said. "Contained. We'll escrow a holdback and price chip, but keep headline at 57 mounters for optics and fairness. Earnouts for good quarters by everyone courage." "What number?" she asked. 2 million holdback, I said. "Release on clean third-party test at 12 months. "Acceptable," she said. Banks are at their kindest when their risk is treated like a cat. Respected, not hugged. Lucas hunted vendor financing like a wolf in Wi-Fi. He found the former owner's family trust still loved the brand and hated the consultants. "They'll carry a slice," he said. "At 8%, 2-year term, balloon on refi. Call it 7, I said, and offer naming rights to a legacy scholarship." We flew to meet Evelyn Shaw in a sunlit parlor full of photographs and dust that felt like loyalty. I asked for something too big. "Roll your family's equity into daylight. We'll put a pension restoration schedule in the shareholders' agreement. You get a board observer seat and veto on any sale to a consultant-led buyer." She studied my face like a deposition. "My husband hated men who said trust me and loved women who showed ledgers," she said. "Show me yours." I did. She nodded. We'll roll 5%, she said. On one condition. You keep the name above the door and the promises below it. Done, I said, trying not to weep into her china. Meanwhile, Kara called with a warning disguised as an offer. Your ex pitched me dirt, she said. Trent, of course. He alleges you stole materials, that your bank is imaginary, that your union note is a fairy tale. Off the record, I said. He's confusing projection with evidence. On the record, she asked. Happy to discuss the two proposals and the public math, I said. No gossip, just governance. She chuckled. You're a nightmare for lazy copy. We papered the escrow holdback, the earnouts, the vendor carry, the union letter, the labor MOU outline. Noah and Damien co-authored a safety plan with timelines short enough to believe and long enough to be honest. We're not promising miracles, Noah said. We're promising maintenance and metrics. I called Judge Marquez to confess my fear. I am 25 and asking a bank to wire more money than my city has park benches, I said. She exhaled a laugh. Fear never leaves, she said. You just learn to seatbelt it. Read your covenants. Sleep. Trust the boring parts. The boring parts saved us. We found a clause in a lease that allowed termination on assignment with a 6-month notice. We found a long-ignored bulk shipping rate we could revive. We found a spine under the paperwork and held it. At 2 a.m., I updated the daylight deck. Headline price 57 millers preserved, $2 nutters escrow, vendor carry at 7%, earnouts for meeting EBITDA targets without cutting human parts, pension restoration on a schedule that wouldn't lie. I added a slide called Promises with Receipts, fans spinning, pay stubs with hours returned, photos of a break room that looked less like sorrow. 10 minutes later, Kara texted, Going to publish. Do you want to go on record? I stared at my kettle, which had taught me all year that boiling is inevitable if you wait. I said yes. Kara calls. Trent pitched me dirt. Want to go on record? Truth is a scalpel. PR is gauze. Kara's article landed like weather. 2 visions for Halcyon. Her headline neutral. Her reporting merciless. She laid out both offers. Maddox's premium scented plan with strategic consulting support, and Daylight's repair first package with workers as co-authors. She linked Maddox fee schedules and leaseback optimization memos with euphemisms translated to English. She quoted Damien, If you fix the fans and stop charging us to breathe, we'll do the rest. Graham responded by threatening defamation with a letter that mistook tone for law. Cho and Hart replied with exhibits. Vivian's public statement was a scalpel wrapped in velvet. We welcome scrutiny. We prefer documents. The piece ignited a small civic pride. Former Halcyon customers posted photos of childhood tents and first backpacks. Nurses donated to a worker fund. A teacher wrote, I want my students to learn this case instead of another season of corporate Halloween. Financial Twitter argued in acronyms. The Atlas Bank Slack channel leaked a screenshot of Rhea writing, The kid can sell a covenant. I printed it and taped it next to Do It Afraid. Graham doubled down with a glossy insert and a trade paper. Premium capital. Premium outcomes. It featured Trent staring into middle distance like he saw a future and wanted to invoice it. The caption called him Deal Captain. My mother called me to ask if that was a boat. Kind of, I said. A boat that leaks. While their PR machine threw confetti, we filed best and final. Daylight's packet was boring by design. Price $57,000. Sources and uses. Escrow math, vendor carry, union letter, safety plan, pension schedule, governance chart with independent majority, and Damien as community director. I signed the cover letter and checked my name 3 times, as if letterhead might forget me. The board scheduled the vote in 7 days. Evelyn invited me for tea the day before, which felt like a summons from history. I spoke to women who worked the cash wrap in '84, and men who changed tires in '91, she said. They like your plan. They like your face. Don't make me regret it. I won't, I said, and meant it in the marrow. That night, I walked the perimeter of the law school twice, praying to the god of filings and functioning printers. Shay sent a selfie from her night shift. Hair in a bun, eyes bright. Caption, I stocked your mansion pantry with ramen in my mind. I answered with a voice note. When we move in, I'm handwriting your name on a basil pot. Morning brought a new email from Atlas. Term sheet upgraded to final. subject to board approval and sign definitive documents within 10 days. Ria added, "Don't make me send this to my boss twice." I laughed into my cup, then cried, then called Vivian, who said, "Now please eat an egg." We arrived at the boardroom early, armed with binders and quiet. Maddox arrived late, armed with charm and hors d'oeuvres no one ate. I opened with a sentence that had been pacing in my throat all week. "We accept responsibility for the boring things," I said. "We will publish them. We will pay people to care." Graham smirked like a reflex. Trent attempted a counterpitch that used premium as punctuation. The directors looked tired of glitter after questions. The chair said, "We'll call Atlas." I handed over Ria's final term sheet with the speed of a woman passing a baby through a window. The board went into a side room. Evelyn stayed, squeezed my hand once, and whispered, "He would have liked you." The door opened. The chair cleared his throat and said, "We're prepared to proceed with Daylight Holdings." I didn't cheer. I breathed. Then I started reading the closing checklist the way you read weather before a hike, because the mountain wasn't money. It was signatures. Atlas Bank upgrades term sheet to final. If Naomi closes in 10 days. Closing tables smell like fear and dry pens. We cram 10 days into a jar that says marmalade but holds lightning. The definitive agreements metastasized. Asset purchase agreement, transition services, IP assignment, pension side letter, labor MOU, environmental escrow agreement, vendor note, officer certificates, legal opinions, a stack of documents tall enough to wobble character. Noah ran transition like a field general with spreadsheets. Lucas lived inside the funds flow. Celeste negotiated like someone who can hear future lawsuits whisper. Vivian filleted adjectives. I fielded a barrage of "one last thing," demands that arrived disguised as afterthoughts but aimed like spears. Graham tried a final gambit. "Increase price to $59 and we'll bless it." I answered with math. The extra $2 would land in consultants' invoices, not workers' pay. The board declined his blessing. They wanted their company back, not a crown. At 8:12 a.m. on closing day, I kissed my grandmother's magnet and walked into a conference room where fluorescent lights forgot mercy. Ria dialed in with a voice that made money behave. "Confirm signatures?" she asked. One by one, counsel confirmed. "Confirm conditions?" Environmental escrow, labor letter, union piece, vendor note, confirmed. "Confirm wire coordinates?" Lucas recited numbers like poetry he'd memorized to survive. Then came the brinkmanship we had predicted. Celery's counsel wanted to narrow the environmental holdback language to release funds on a qualified engineer, SI letter, which could have been a consultant in a better suit. I shook my head. Independent third-party test, state-licensed environmental firm, results at 12 months, I said. No loopholes. Silence stretched. Then the chair of the board said, "We accept Ms. Blake's language." It went into the document like a spine. We signed. We countersigned. We initialed pages that looked like they needed therapy. Ria cleared her throat. "Bank is prepared to initiate on full receipt." The wire waterfall showed boxes grayed to green. One by one they lit. Senior facility draw, vendor carry, cure costs, fees, the honest kind, escrow funded, cash to sellers. 57,000 left a screen in New York and became ownership in the time it takes to forgive someone who isn't honty sorry. Noah shook my hand like a vow. "See you at the warehouse," he said. Damien texted a selfie from the floor, fans spinning behind him. "We're ready, chair." Celeste hugged me once like a ledger that balances. Vivian handed me a pen. "Keep this," she said. It signed something useful. We walked out into a sky that had forgotten to be dramatic. Kara waited on the sidewalk, notebook in hand. "Statement?" she asked. I said, "We bought a patient with a pulse. Now we do the boring work of rehab." She nodded like the sentence met journalistic standards. I went to a small dealership in New Jersey, finished the paperwork that had been paused by closing chaos, and handed my mother a key. She cried the way people cry when weather changes after long winters. "We'll put groceries in it," she said, wiping her face with a determination that made the car look braver. Back in Boston, Trent lurked near the law school steps like a myth that refuses exile. He stepped into my path, smile thin. "You won today," he said, voice pitched low for intimidation. "You won't last a quarter." "Maybe," I said. "But if we don't, It'll be because physics, not your family, said no. He laughed without humor. Enjoy your boat, Captain. I prefer chair, I said and kept walking. Shay texted a photo of a grocery cart full of basil and ramen. Stocking your mansion, S Pantry by Faith. I replied, make room for receipts. That night, Noah sent the first daylight internal memo. Safety audit scheduled, e-com sprint underway, pay calendar posted. It ended with 5 words. Bring your boots. We're rebuilding. Trent to Naomi, low and lethal. You won today. You won't last a quarter. Some doors open because you built the wall. The first revived Halcyon location didn't smell like nostalgia. It smelled like fresh sealant and coffee a manager brewed for the crew at 5 a.m. Because people fix better when warmth shows up early. Noah walked me through the floor map like a field general who traded drone footage for end caps. Product that moves, product that teaches, product that earns its keep or finds another home. The wall we'd built, lease unwinds, fair schedules, working fans, held. We tested the new profit share message in the break room where fluorescent lights had learned mercy. Damien stood beside me, forearms crossed, eyes soft for once. 5% above baseline, I said. Whiteboard markers lined like instruments. Paid quarterly, transparent calculation, posted on the bulletin board where gossip used to live alone. A driver raised a hand. Knuckles nicked by honest work. And when the quarter dips? We keep your hours honest, I said. Profit share rides. Wages don't drown. They clapped like fireproof paper. We walked the back aisle and found a small shrine to survival. Fan blades dusted. A broom leaned upright. A hand-drawn schedule that didn't steal anyone's lunch. The memo hit different, a picker told me. It said what day the checks come. We learned long ago. Dignity is calendar-specific. After the walkthrough, I met Allegra Stone, a realtor who could sell a closet as a cathedral if the light cooperated. She had a key ring that sounded like applause. Uptown, she said, eyes mischievous. A mansion with bones you can talk to. I argued reflexively, then remembered I'd promised a younger version of me that home would not mean permission. It would mean belonging. The Upper West Side address looked like a postcard I used to scroll past to avoid envy. Inside, a foyer with a staircase ready to hold graduations. A library lined with wood warm enough to adopt. A terrace that let the Hudson lean in and gossip kindly. In the kitchen, sunlight chose a table no one owned yet. Allegra watched me measure rooms with breath. You're buying time, she said gently. Square footage is just translation. I called Shay from the library where Spines and my spine compared notes. You're on speaker, she said, and I heard nurses cheer behind her. If there's a room I can cry in, it's ours. There's a room, I said. Bring basil seeds. We walked the terrace in silence, like people who have learned to let gratitude speak first. Closing felt small after $57,000. The mortgage broker blinked at the wire like a man who had never seen a paralegal become a chairwoman, and then a New York taxpayer deserving a couch. I signed. Allegra slid keys across oak like a ceremony, and I held metal that felt like punctuation. We did this. Kara S. follow-up story, landed by afternoon, from paralegal to owner. How daylight saved Halcyon without cutting through people. It showed Damien's crew laughing under new fans. Noah explaining retrofit timelines with grease on his knuckles. Me standing in front of a map with arrows that didn't lie. The comments contained fewer feral men and more grandmothers who typed like myths. Atlas reposted a sentence I wrote. We rebuild in daylight, because secrets rust faster than trucks. We celebrated the small way. Pizza on moving boxes in the library. Celeste brought fancy olives to pretend we understood them. Lucas set his laptop on a ladder and cued lo-fi beats like accountants who moonlight as DJs. Damien toasted with seltzer. To checks that clear, fans that spin, and bosses who show up, he said. Noah added, to boring memos that arrive on time. We laughed the way scaffolds creak when the building exhales. On the stoop, after the last box left the sidewalk, a courier handed me a thick, embossed envelope with a return address that announced itself like old money. I broke the seal and saw the first line, Notice of Shareholder Action, Maddox, and smiled without humor. Headlines travel, so do habits. An embossed envelope on the mansion's stoop, Notice of Shareholder Action, Maddox. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Maddox's petition tried to look surgical. A minority holder action alleging board capture, requesting to seat Trent as a shareholder representative to stabilize execution. Translation: invite the fox to design the henhouse. Northcrest, a proxy firm with a reputation for confusing decisiveness with aggression, attached its preliminary recommendation, like lipstick on a threat. Vivian skimmed, then slid it aside the way you move a coaster. We called an emergency board session. Noah dialed in from a loading dock where optimism wore reflective tape. Celeste appeared from an airport lounge, headphones crowdfunding her patience. Damien took a seat at the end. Not a director, not a guest, simply the moral meter. I opened with receipts. Performance against plan. Lease unwinds closed. Safety KPIs 3 points better than baseline. Profit share accruals posted where paychecks learn company values. Northcrest frames this as experience versus novelty, Graham said, voice lacquered. Seat my son, and we can help with street relationships. Vivian lifted one eyebrow. Your street keeps tripping, she murmured. I kept my tone inside the rails. We already have a labor seat in motion, I said. And we proposed Damian Brooks for a compromise community director. Independent, term limited, full voting rights on safety and audit. Northcrest's rep, a man whose tie believed in derivatives, warned of operational naivete. I shared video of Noah standing in a pit with supervisors, calling out retrofit milestones. I displayed a chart titled Consulting Fees Avoided and watched their mouth do math. Naivete is cheaper than nostalgia, I said, and we're not naive. We launched an employee proxy drive that obeyed every rule as if the camera never turns off. FAQs in plain English, pre-filled but unsubmitted cards, QR codes to a portal that told the truth about rights. Zora, borrowed from my last war, coordinated with a precision that made the calendar blush. We called pension funds who like their managers boring, Celeste, Vivian, and I in a chorus of governance that promised fewer headlines and more minutes. I visited Evelyn Shaw, widow of the founder, and laid the situation on her table where old coffee rings testified to lives lived. They're trying to reverse the vote through the side door, I said. We're offering a seat to someone who understands what warranty meant in your day. She listened without blinking. When my husband said warranty, she replied, he meant, I know where you live. I'll show up. I told her Damien knew addresses. Proxy day arrived with 2 bright lights and a nervous printer. The tally began, numbers arriving like weather alerts. Tie, surge, tie again. A Northcrest analyst whispered phrases at our independent director as if language could tip scale. I refreshed a dashboard until the keyboard filed a complaint. Damien sat calm as a forklift, hands folded like a prayer that pays overtime. At 5, a courier pushed through the door with an envelope sealed in a style I recognized. Evelyn Shaw, revocable trust, irrevocable grant of voting power. Counsel opened it gently, read twice, nodded once. Effective immediately, he said. The trust votes with Daylight's independent slate until the pension restoration schedule is satisfied. We logged it. Northcrest's face learned humility again. Graham attempted charm. The room declined. Seat Mr. Brooks, the chair announced. Motion carries. Damien blinked like a man told the ball is his for a play he's been running in his head since 09. I'll do the reading, he said softly, meaning the binders, the minutes, the boring we've promised people. I walked the perimeter of the conference table and shook hands like a person making a habit. Graham's eyes promised lawsuits. Vivian's eyes promised depositions. Mine promised calendars and coffee at 6 a.m., with crews who measure sincerity and pallets moved without injuries. Proxy tally tied, until a courier arrives with Evelyn Shaw's irrevocable grant. Sometimes the loudest vote is the quiet signature of a widow. With Evelyn's grant in the ledger and Damien sworn in, the air in the boardroom changed weight. We opened with lease unwind victories, 5 terminated, 8 renegotiated, net savings that didn't require a thesaurus to celebrate. The pension restoration schedule slid across the table like a treaty. Quarterly contributions, transparent statements mailed to homes that used to receive too many urgent envelopes. Noah's update featured fewer metaphors, more torque. Graham spoke last, as if finality were the same as authority. We'll be watching, he said, which is what men say when they realize the cameras belong to the people who show up at 4 a.m. He tried to submit Trent as observer. The chair declined with a courtesy that could cut glass. We moved on. I stepped outside and called Shay, because some victories need to echo in kitchens that have seen you pay rent with coins. We did it, I said. Damien's on the board. Pension track is live. She screamed so loud a code cart might have paused. Put my basil near his chair, she commanded. Let it judge. We laughed until the street decided it was autumn again. Back inside, I announced something I'd held like a breath. Bar passage. I'd taken the exam early under a diploma privilege program tied to clinical hours and a jurisdiction that loves paperwork more than romance. She's officially dangerous, Vivian said. And there was hugging, the kind where professionals check for pens in pockets first. That night, we didn't plan a gala. We ordered pizza and drank seltzer on boxes in the mansion kitchen that still smelled like wood asking to be oiled. Celeste told a story about a plant that thrived only when moved a foot to the left. I looked at Shay's basil pot and nudged it. Lucas sat on the floor with a spreadsheet open like a nightlight. Damien arrived with 2 crew members who stared at the ceilings like churches can hire them. We clinked slices instead of glasses. Speech, Noah said, mouth full of pepperoni. I shook my head. No speeches, I said. Just a sentence. When we miss, we'll say so on paper. Damien nodded. And when we hit, he added, we buy better fans. Agreement signed by Greece. My phone buzzed as the last box collapsed into cardboard humility. Judge Marquez. Clerkship offer. 1 year. Part-time while you chair. Interested? I sat down because my knees remembered they had a history. I read it twice, then again, then handed it to Vivian because some moments require witnesses with good eyebrows. You'll do both, she said. You'll sleep less. You'll be better. Noah whistled. Damien smiled like the dock lights found a new reason to turn on. Shay yelled through the speaker, accept and then calendar your vitamins. I stepped into the library because decisions like light. I thought of the first day I held Harvard's red envelope like it might bite, of the clinic voicemail promising to choke us if we didn't behave, of the elevator where Trent promised to escort me out of law. I thought of my mother's hand on the Camry hood, forgiving asphalt for previous sins. I thought of Evelyn's pen, steady, irrevocable. I texted the judge. Yes, thank you. I'll bring boring memos and good shoes. She replied with a thumbs-up emoji that looked like an opinion prepared for appellate review. I returned to the kitchen and announced it. There was cheering, and the sound of a basil leaf tearing, because Shay believes in rituals. Tomorrow, Noah said, rinsing plates. The dock at 6. Tomorrow, I agreed. The mansion exhaled like a room made for tired champions. I checked doors twice, then stood at the window watching the Hudson carry other people's secrets away. I let one go. That voice on a rooftop saying you'll never make it. It floated, then sank, then taught me nothing further. Phone buzz. Judge Marquez. Clerkship offer. 1 year. Part-time while you chair. Interested? I fell asleep under a ceiling I used to visit in Zillow tabs. Morning in the mansion doesn't roar. It hums. The radiator sings a key I can afford. I make coffee in a kitchen that remembers other women, other breakfasts, other worries. I thank them with cream and a calendar printed on purpose. The terrace invites the Hudson to gossip, and I let it. Then I lace my boots because stories are exercise only until they're jobs. I split my week between chambers and warehouses. In Judge Marquez's courtroom, language wears uniforms. I learn how sentences carry time. She lets me draft orders. I remove adjectives like a gardener pulling weeds. On dock floors, language wears steel-toed boots. I learn how safe feels when you can measure it. Noah updates me on retrofit schedules. Damien brings grievances that read like memos written by Knuckles. We solve them with policy instead of charisma. At Halcyon, the studio stores begin to breathe. A climbing clinic scheduled for Saturdays. A sewing station where a retired seamstress repairs old packs like elders telling stories. A video corner with a ring light and a sign that reads, "No lies." Profit share accrues. The bulletin board posts the math and the date checks drop. People take photos because trust is still new. We mail pension statements that look like apologies turning into vows. Sundays, the mansion hosts dinners. Shay claims the stove like a courtroom, declaring garlic her co-counsel. Celeste sets a table that confesses she still hates mismatched forks. Lucas argues with the oven clock. Damien brings a cake someone's aunt decorated with a frosting tent. Crooked and correct. My mother comes once a month, sits in the library and whispers to the walls, "We're safe." I disagree politely. We're vigilant with grace. Between courses, I hang frames in the hallway. First Harvard letter, first daylight closing checklist, first profit share memo printed on paper that will yellow honestly. In the middle, I hang the screenshot of Trent's text. "You'll never make it." Not as a wound, but as a mile marker. I caption it beneath the frame. "Thank you for the map." When guests ask, I say, "This is where I turned left." We established the Daylight Scholarship for clinic students the way we wish someone had funded ours. Rent, Metro cards, emergency teeth, the boring bills that decide whether you can afford to be brave. I send the first check with a note. Do it afraid. Send receipts. Caleb replies with a photo of 3 students holding envelopes like helmets. Kara visits to film a quiet follow-up. No chandeliers, just ledgers and laughter. She asks what I'd tell 24-year-old me. I say, put your phone on airplane mode when the wrong person texts, and also, keep a folder named Receipts for Threats and Reasons for the Small Wins that Make You Useful. She nods and films my basil plant because Shay made her. There are setbacks. A shipment late enough to embarrass us. A part recall that eats margin. A headline that misreads profit share as profit scare. We publish the miss, fix the schedules, push a memo with new dates, replace the parts, and remind the reporter that reading remains available. We do not spiral, we calendar, we apologize correctly. At night, I walk Riverside in a coat that used to be an aspiration, and now is simply warm. I call Judge Marquez to ask if a comma should live or die. She kills it cheerfully. I text Noah a photo of a storefront window where a kid presses her face to a tent like it as a fort. I DM Damien a photo of a bulletin board where someone has drawn a fan with a smile. Power wasn't the gavel or the wire. It was the promise to keep showing up boring and brave. It was putting dates on dignity. It was writing the plan where everyone could see it, and then living there. If someone told you, "You'll never make it," would you stay in their house to prove them wrong? Or go build your own and buy theirs later? Comment your move, and subscribe.